Hi. In this lecture, we're going to look at our fourth category of reasons about why you'd want to take a course in modeling, why modeling is so important. And that is to help you make better decisions, strategize better, and design things better. So let's get started. This should be a lot of fun. All right, so first reason why models are so useful. They're good decision aids. They help you make better decisions. Let me give an example to just get us going here. So what you see here is a picture of a whole bunch of different financial institutions. These are companies like Bear Stearns, AIG, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley. And this represents the relationship between these companies in terms of how one of their economic success depends on another. Now, imagine you're the federal government and you've got a financial crisis. So a lot of these companies, or some of these companies, are starting to fail. And you've got to decide, okay, do I bail them out? Do I save one of these companies? Well, let's use this very simple model to help us make that decision. All right, so to do that, we need a little bit more of an understanding of what these numbers represent. So let's look at AIG, which is right here, and JP Morgan, which is right here. So now we see a number of 466 between the two of those. What that number represents is how correlated JP Morgan's success is with AIG's success. In particular, how correlated their failures are. So if AIG has a bad day, how likely is it that JP Morgan has a bad day? And what we see there is a really big number. Now, if we look up here at this 94, this represents the link between Wells Fargo and Lehman Brothers. What that tells us is that if Lehman Brothers has a bad day, well, it only has a slight effect on Wells Fargo and vice versa. So now you're the government, you got to decide, okay, who do I bail out? Nobody or somebody? Well, let's look at Lehman Brothers. There's only three lines going in and out of Lehman Brothers, and one is a 94, I guess, and four lines. One is a 103, one is a 158, and one is a 155. Those are relatively small numbers. So for the government to say, look, even though Lehman Brothers has been around for a long time and it's an important company, these numbers are pretty small. If they fail, it doesn't look like these other companies will fail. But now let's look at AIG. We've got a 466, we've got a 441, we've got a 456, we've got a 390, we've got a 490. So there's huge numbers associated with AIG. Because there's those huge numbers, you basically have to figure, you know what, we probably have to prop AIG back up, even if you don't want to, because if you don't, there's the possibility that this whole system will fail. So what we see here is the incredible power of models, right, to help us make a better decision, because the government did let Lehman Brothers fail, and it's terrible for Lehman Brothers, but the economy sort of soldiered on. They didn't let AIG fail, and we don't know for sure that it would have, that the whole financial apparatus of the United States would have fallen apart. But the thing is, they propped up AIG, and we made it. The country made it. So it looks like they made a reasonable decision. All right, so that's sort of big, important financial decisions. Let's look at something a little more fun. This is just a simple sort of logic puzzle that will help us see how models can be useful. Now, this is a game called the Monty Hall problem, and it's named after Monty Hall was the host of a game show called Let's Make a Deal that aired during the 1970s. Now, the problem I'm going to describe to you is a characterization of an event that could happen on the show. It's one of several scenarios that could happen on the show, and here's basically how it works. There's three doors. Behind one of these doors is a prize. Behind the other two doors, there's some silly thing like a goat, right, or a woman dressed up in a ballerina's outfit or something, right? So, but one of them has something fantastic, like a new car or a washing machine. Now, what you get to do is you pick one door. So maybe you pick door number one, right? So you pick door number one. Now, Monty knows where the prize is. So the two doors you didn't pick, one of those always has the goat behind it, or silly prize behind it. So because one of those always has a silly prize behind it, he can always show you one of those other two doors. So you pick door number one, right? And what Monty does, you picked one, and what Monty does is he then opens up door number three and says, look, here's a goat. Then he says, hey, do you want to switch to door number two? Well, do you? All right, that's a hard problem. So let's first try and get the logic right, and then we'll write down a formal model. So it's easier to see the logic for this problem by increasing the number of doors. So let's suppose there's 5 doors. And now there's 5 doors. Let's suppose you pick this blue door, this light blue door. The probability you're correct is 1/5, right? One of the doors has a prize. The probability you're correct is 1/5. So the probability you're not correct is 4/5. So there's a 1/5 chance you're correct. There's a 4/5 chance you're not correct. Now, let's suppose that Monty Hall is also playing this game with you, and he knows the answer. So Monty's thinking, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to show you that it's not behind this yellow door. And then he said, you know what else I'm going to show you? That it's not behind the pink door. He said, I'm going to be nice. I'm going to show you it's not behind the green door. Now he says, do you want to switch from the light blue door to the dark blue door? Well, in this case, you should start thinking, initially the probability I was right was only 1/5. And he revealed all those other doors that doesn't have the price. It seems much more likely that this is the correct door than mine's the correct door. And in fact, it is much more likely. The probability is 4/5 it's behind that dark blue door, and only 1/5 it's behind your door. So you should switch. And you should also switch in the case of 2. Now let's formalize this. This isn't so much, this is just, we'll use a simple decision theory model to show why in fact you should switch. All right, so let's start out, we'll just use some basic probability. There's 3 doors. You pick door number 1. The probability you're right is 1/3. And the probability that it's door number 2 is 1/3, the probability it's door number 3 is 1/3. Now, what we want to do is break this into 2 sets. There's a 1/3 chance that you're right, and there's a 2/3 chance that you're wrong. Right? Now, after you pick door number 1, the prize can't be moved. So it's either behind door number 2, number 3, or maybe you got it right. Maybe it's behind door number 1. So now let's think about what Monty can do. Monty could basically show you, if it's behind door number 1 or door number 2, he can show you door number 3. He can say, look, there's the goat. Well, if he does that, because he could always show you one of these doors, nothing happened to your probability of 1/3. There's a 1/3 chance you were right before. Since he can always show you a door, there's still only a 1/3 chance you're right. Right? Alternatively, suppose that it was behind door number 3. If it was behind door number 3, well, then he could show you door number 2. And he'd say the goat's here. So it's still the case that nothing happens to your probability. And the reason why is when you think about it in terms of these 2 sets, you didn't learn anything. You learned nothing about this other set right here, the 2/3 chance you're wrong, because he can always show you a goat. So your initial probability of being correct was 1/3. Your final chance of being correct was probably 1/3. So just this idea of sort of drawing circles and writing probabilities allows us to see that the correct decision in the Monty Hall problem is to switch, right? Just like when we looked at that financial decision that the federal government had to make with the circles and the arrows, you draw that out and you realize the best decision is let Lehman Brothers fail, bail out AIG. All right, so let's move on and look at sort of the next reason that models can be helpful, and that is comparative statics. What do I mean by that? Well, here's a standard model from economics. What we can think of as comparative statics means, you move from one equilibrium to another. So what you see here is S is a supply curve. That's the supply for some good. And D1 and D2 are demand curves. So what you see is demand shifting out. So when this demand shifts out in this way, what we get is that more goods are sold, the quantity goes up, and the price goes up. So if people want more of something, more is going to get sold and the price will go up. So this is just sort of saying how the equilibrium moves. So this is, again, a simple example of how models help us understand how the world will change, at least an equilibrium world, just by drawing some simple figures. All right. Reason number 3, counterfactuals. What do I mean by that? Well, you think we only get to run the world once. We only get to run the tape one time. But if we write models of the world, we can sort of rerun the tape using those models. So here's an example. In April of 2009, the spring of 2009, the federal government decided to implement a recovery plan. Well, what you see here is sort of the effect. This line right here shows the effect with the recovery plan. And this line shows here, here's what a model shows would have happened without the recovery plan. Now, we can't be sure that that happened, but at least we have some understanding, perhaps, of what the effect of the recovery plan was, which is great. So these counterfactuals aren't going to be exact. They're going to be approximate, but still, they help us figure out after the fact whether a policy was a good policy or not. Reason number 4, to identify and rank levers. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a simple model of contagion of failure. And so this is a model where one country might fail. So in this case, that country is going to be England. And then we can ask what happens over time. So when you see initially, after England fails, we see Ireland and Belgium fail. And then after that, we see France fail. And after that, we see Germany fail. So what this tells us is in terms of its effect on the world's financial system, London's a big lever. And so London's something we care about a great deal. Now, let's take another policy issue, climate change. One of the big things in climate change is the carbon cycle. It's one of the models that's used all the time, simple carbon models. We know the total amount of carbon is fixed. Now, it can be up in the atmosphere, it can be down in the earth. If it's on the earth, it's better because it doesn't contribute to global warming. So if you want to think about where do you intervene, we want to ask, where in this cycle are there big numbers, right? So you look here in terms of surface radiation, that's a big number. Or if you think of solar radiation coming in, that's a big number coming in. So you want to, when you think about where you want to have a policy impact, you want to think about it in terms of where those numbers are large. So if you look at the amount of carbon that's reflected by the surface, that's only a 30. That's not a very big lever. Okay, reason 5, experimental design. Now, what do I mean by experimental design? Well, suppose you want to come up with some new policy. So, for example, the federal government, when they were trying to decide how do we auction off the federal airwaves, right, for cell phones, they wanted to raise as much money as possible. Well, to test what auction design would work best, they ran some experiments. Well, the thing you want to do is you want to think about, so here's the example of experiment, and what you see is this is a round from some auction, and these are different bidders and, you know, the cost for that they paid. What you can do is you want to think, how do I run the best possible experiment, the most informative possible experiment? And one way to do that, right, is to construct some simple models. All right. Reason 6, institutional design. Now this is a biggie, and this is one where, you know, means actually a lot to me. The person you see at the top here, this is Stan Ryder. He was one of my advisors in graduate school. And the man on the bottom is Leo Hurwitz. He was one of my mentors in graduate school, and Leo won the Nobel Prize in economics. And what Leo won the Nobel Prize for, which is a field known as mechanism design. Now this diagram is called the Mount-Ryder diagram, named after Stan Ryder in the previous picture, and then Ken Mount, one of his co-authors. And let me explain this diagram to you because it's very important. What you see here is this theta here. What this is supposed to represent is the environment, the set of technologies, people's preferences, those sorts of things. X over here represents the outcomes, what we want to have happen. So how we want to sort of use our technologies and use our labor and use, you know, whatever we got at our disposal to create good outcomes. Now this arrow here is sort of, it's what we desire. It's like if we could sit around and decide collectively what kind of outcomes we'd like to have given the technology, this is what we collectively decide. This is something that's called the social choice correspondence or social choice function. Sort of what would be the ideal outcome for society. Well, the thing is, society doesn't get the ideal outcome because what happens that, you know, wants always, because the thing is, to get those outcomes, you have to use mechanisms, and that's what this M stands for, mechanisms. So that mechanism might be something like a market, it might be a political institution, it might be a bureaucracy. And what we want to ask is the outcome we get through the mechanism, right, which goes like this, is that equal to the outcome that we would get, right, ideally? And the better a mechanism is, the closer it is to equal to what we'd ideally want. Example. So with my undergraduate students for a homework assignment one time, I said, suppose we allocated classes by a market. So, you know, so you had to bid for classes. Would that be a good thing or bad thing? Well, currently the way we do it is there's a hierarchy. So seniors, you know, fourth-year students register first, and then juniors, and then sophomores and freshmen. And when the students were asked, you know, should you have a market, their first reaction was yes, because markets work, right? They had this belief that, you know, if you have a market, what you get here is sort of what you'd expect to get, right? What you'd like to get, so it's sort of equal. But when they thought about choosing classes, they realized, wait a minute, markets may not work very well, and the reason why is that you need to graduate. And so seniors need specific courses, and that's why we let seniors register first. And if people could bid for courses, then freshmen who had a lot of money might bid away the courses of seniors, and people might never graduate from college. So a good institution, markets may be good in some settings, they may not be in others. The way we figure that out is by using models. Reason 7, to help choose among policies and institutions. Simple example. Suppose we're thinking about a market for pollution permits or a cap and trade system. We can write down a simple model and it can tell us which one's going to work better. Or here's another example. This is a picture of the city of Ann Arbor, and if you look here you see some green areas, right? What these green things are is they're green spaces. Now there's a question of, should the city of Ann Arbor create more green spaces? Now you might think, of course, green space is a good thing, but the problem is if you buy up a bunch of green space, like this area here, right, is all green, what can happen is people can say, you know, let's move next to that. Let's build little houses all around here because it's always going to be green. And that can actually lead to more sprawl. So what can seem like really good, simple ideas may not be good ideas if you actually construct a model to think through it. Okay, we've covered a lot, so let's give a quick summary here. How can models help us? Well, the first thing they can do is they can be real-time decision aids. They can help us figure out when we intervene, when we don't intervene, and what choices we make. Second, they can help us with comparative statics. We can figure out, you know, what's likely to happen, right, if we make this choice. Third, they can help us with counterfactuals. They can, you know, after we've done a policy, we can sort of run a model to think about what would have happened if we hadn't chosen that policy. Fourth, we can use them to identify and rank levers. Oftentimes we've got lots of choices to make. Models can figure out, you know, which choice might be the best, will have the most influence. Fifth, They can help us with experimental design. They can help us design experiments in order to develop better policies and better strategies. Sixth, they can help us design institutions themselves, figuring out, should we have a market here? Should we have a democracy? Should we use a bureaucracy? And seventh, finally, they can help us choose among policies and institutions. So if we're thinking about one policy or another policy, we can use models to decide among the two. All right, thank you.